And I welcome now our special guest, the great storyteller himself, Lee Bermejo. Lee, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down and talk to me here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So for the Batman Book Club, I always ask somebody the first time on, what is your favorite Batman story?
It's tough, right? Because there's so many good stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really say I have a favorite. It kind of goes in cycles where, it depends on what I'm working on too, because maybe, I don't know, during Batman Damned, I was looking at the cults and Arkham Asylum and stuff that was a little bit more, I don't want to say supernatural, but that had a horror bent to it while we were
Sure.
working on that. Whereas maybe in earlier stuff, I would be looking at Dark Knight Returns or Year One. But I also love a lot of the stuff that was coming out. I guess I would have been 9 or 10 years old, late 80s and early 90s Batman stuff. So Legends of the Dark Knight that was coming out at the time I was collecting that. And so there's stories there that I love, like Prey, the one that I think I don't know how you pronounce his name, Doug Mensch or Munch, or I don't know how
I
you
think I've
pronounce his
heard him say Mensch, so I just go with Mensch. Sometimes I just say Doug M. People know
name.
who we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And Paul Gulacy, they did this great series called Prey, and there was just a lot of really interesting stuff that was coming out in Legends of the Dark Knight around that time. And of course, Norm Brayfogle was drawing the regular Batman book. So yeah, it was a good time. Death in the Family was kind of happening, I think, sometime around then. So I definitely I have a soft spot for all that stuff too.
That's a great era. That was like my intro era.
Yeah.
Was that time period in the Legends of the Dark Knight title. I still don't think people realize how many great stories are in that title. So many good stories came out of Legends of the Dark Knight, the original.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And,
It's just a
and
great concept. It was out of continuity, able to give people a chance to just do, standalone Batman stories, which I wish they had a title like that now, but
yeah,
I guess there's no real need to with Black Label and other stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I'm really glad that you said also the name that came out of your mouth is Brayfogle, because when asked, I may have been able. I've been fortunate enough. I've gotten to talk to you before, and I've told you that you're my current like favorite artist. But when anybody asks me, I always say, "Oh, it's Lee Bermejo or Norm Brayfogle." Brayfogle is my intro to Batman. So like I don't know, just the way he drew Batman. His art was phenomenal, I thought.
He was the first comic book professional I met. He was the first guy I ever met. He was doing a store signing in the town I grew up in. I mean, this was right around the time that Tim Drake was becoming the new Robin, and
Mm-hmm.
so Neil Adams had designed the new Robin suit, and Norm Brayfogle did this signing at the local comic shop, and he brought all these photocopies of all his designs. And so he had all these alternative Robin costume designs. And I was so taken by these things. I remember he gave me a couple. And I was young. I mean, I was young. I was probably 10 or 11 years old at the time. Maybe a little older than that. Those years kind of blur together. But he was so generous and so nice and just cool. And I was already a big fan of his, so that was a good first experience for comic book professional for sure.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And
Yeah.
how fortuitous he was your first artist you got to meet, and then you became an artist yourself. So there you go. So, and before we move on to the book that we're going to talk about today, I want to ask you, because I probably have a feeling, and a big shout out to our mutual friend Bill Ramey, who helped make this happen. And I think he may have given me a little heads up on how you felt, but how did you feel about the new Batman movie?
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. I thought it was excellent. I mean, it was, most people who know me probably would have known that after walking that movie. Because for years I've been banging the drum of wanting to see a Batman movie that was kind of like The Crow or Seven. And so lo and behold, we have a movie that pretty much has that vibe, and it accomplished a lot of things that I really wanted to see in a Batman film for a long time, and I'm a fan of all the iterations, and that's not the political answer. It's just there's elements of every movie version that they've done almost
Yeah.
that I like, and there's also stuff I have a real big problem with. You know, I've said this a million times. I think Christopher Nolan did excellent movies, but I'm not a fan of the visual aspect of those films at all. So I don't like the cinematography. I'm not a fan of the suit. I'm not, you know, there's a lot about those movies that I didn't like at the time they came out, and but he did a lot of other things amazingly well with those movies, and much the same way all the other iterations have, you know, the things that I love and other things that I love a lot less.
Yeah.
So this movie, I think, more than any of the other films, captured a type of Batman that I really like to see, which is a very fallible Batman, a very human Batman. And I love the fact that the universe of this Gotham City feels so real, but yet stylized at the same time. That strikes a very difficult balance. You know, Burton, I love the aesthetic of Burton's movies, but they're very stylized. You know, they're and I love that about them. But they lose an element of reality, you know, and the Burton Batmans, specifically, but like Batman Returns, which I think is a phenomenal. It's a weird, creepy film, and I love it. But I think that it's not really a Batman movie to me. It's a Tim Burton movie, and it's through his lens that we get to see these characters. But this movie also had, I think, some of the best cinematography I've seen in recent years. I mean, it's just work that Greg Fraser did was just incredible, and the production design was phenomenal. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the suit. I'm a big fan of the suit, and I just like the choices that Reeves made, and the fact that it was kind of a slow burn movie that wasn't afraid to kind of take its time and be a little darker, and also, you know, juggle a lot of plot, you know, which Batman movies don't tend to do, you know, outside of maybe The Dark Knight. You know what I mean? They don't tend to want to juggle a lot of plot points. So I really liked it. I thought it was phenomenal.
Awesome. Anybody who's been in the area of Batman on film, I think, gets the gist that we feel the same way. Everybody with that, we all adored the movie, loved it. So you said that you were a big fan of the suit, and I think you did some variant covers for Batman the Imposter, in which I think the one for book one, I think we all got a lot of. Was this meant to maybe be like a cousin to the suit from the movie? Because I think this made a lot of us feel like this looks kind of similar to what we've seen. Granted, we hadn't seen the movie yet, but we'd seen trailers and pictures and stuff.
Right. No, I think that was just me looking at Andrea Sorrentino's work, and I was trying to do his suit in the book, which I'm sure was inspired by the film, you know. But I wasn't. It was me looking through the comic book and trying to figure out what his approach was, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't really maybe indirectly inspired by the movie, but it certainly wasn't my goal with those covers. I see the suit that I draw a lot
Mhm.
more in the movie. You know, I see
Yeah, oh
that
yeah.
being closer to the movie. You know, for sure. And there's, you know, I think a lot of visual. The movie had a lot of its visual aesthetic that I felt like was very um, uh, close to what I like to see and what I try to accomplish in my Batman work. You know, so
Yeah.
maybe it's also the case of shit, like I said, shared influences. And I know that my work has been extremely influenced by Darius Khandri, who is he's the cinematographer. He did City of Lost Children, and he did Seven. He shot Seven. He's he's been a guy whose visual aesthetic I've been following since I was, you know, in my late teens.
Cool.
And so that influence kind of comes through in my work. And obviously this movie is influenced a lot by Seven and by that aesthetic. So you're kind of starting to see some very similar inspirations kind of converging here. And I think that's why so many people have made that kind of connection.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. And we've just deduced why we're thinking what we're thinking. Whereas your variant for Batman 121 seems to be a direct homage, if you will, to the Batman, which I think that this.
Oh yeah.
Wow, that looks great. Well done.
Yeah. That's supposed to be Robert Pattinson. I mean, that was the point of that job. I mean, those variants were supposed to be Robert Pattinson. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like I was trying to do something inspired by the film. That was very much me doing the film image.
Was that cool for you when you were asked to do a variant and you got to do it on a suit that you flat out that you really liked?
Yeah, it was it was cool to get kind of like the assets package for the movie, which are essentially all these kind of behind the scenes photos.
Oh, cool.
And at that point I had seen the first trailer, so I kind of knew what they were going for. But you know, being able to kind of see a lot more of the concept art and see a lot more of the behind the scenes kind of stuff and get a real idea of what they were doing with the movie, that was my first real indication of like, oh, well, this is right up my alley. I mean, I can easily do something in this that fits in this world. So it was a pleasure.
That's very cool. All right, well, let's just move on from the Batman to more talk of the Batman, and specifically a book that you and I are going to talk about, Arkham Asylum, a Serious House on Serious Earth. Now, some quick background on it, as many listeners know already. It was released in 1989, written by Grant Morrison, illustrated by Dave McKean. It's been collected in hardcovers and some trade paperbacks, an absolute edition. It's available digitally. When I reached out to you and asked if you'd like to talk about a book, there wasn't a lot of back and forth. You said Arkham Asylum. Is that cool? So
Yeah.
why did this one come to mind to you?
I think this was the first Batman book, first comic book that I read that I remember having a real emotional impact on me outside of just the excitement that reading comics could bring. You know, it really stuck with me. I got this the year it came out, and so that would make me 12 when I read Arkham Asylum for the first time, and it was so psychological. It was, I mean, it turned my stomach at times. You know what I mean? Because it was unlike really any other Batman book that I'd read at that point in time, and it approached the character kind of in this mythic way. You know, you never really got a good look at him. He wasn't treated as anything other than this kind of shape. You know, he was a black shape for most of the book, with very little information given, which made him almost wraith-like, you know, and
Yeah.
he became kind of a supernatural presence. And but it was the approach that I think Morrison took with all the different villains that I really liked. You know, this was coming out at the same time as, like I said, the first Burton movie. So there was kind of this version of the Joker that I had been familiar with from the TV show, you know, the 66 TV show, so the Cesar Romero Joker. And then there was this Jack Nicholson Joker, and obviously all the Jokers from the comics, Killing Joke and stuff like that. But this Joker was the first one to really scare me. And really, this Joker really, you know, I can remember at the time flipping through pages and seeing some close-ups of, you know, some of those amazing close-ups of his face. And it was like, whoa, this is just unlike anything I'd experienced. And I guess it didn't really hit home until years later. But it was also part of this whole group of painted comics that were coming out at the time. Mm-hmm. That, you know, as a kid, I was just reading them and enjoying them, but also starting to become very aware of the artwork, of the art of these books. And the fact that this was so interesting and unique visually, it was like, oh, you can do this with comics, you know? And I think that's been something that's kind of stuck with me through my entire career. So that was a long-winded way of giving you an answer, but, you know, there you go.
No, that's fine. That's great. Cause I mean, some follow-up questions I was going to ask was, you know, how old you were when you first read it and such. And so the first version, or the version that you bought then, because I think the first version that came out was a like an 80-page hardcover, right?
Yeah, it's still in my shelf over here. Yeah, I still have that same edition that I've had for most of my life at this point. Yeah, it's you know, it strangely also was one of those books that stayed in pretty good shape. Like, yeah. I wouldn't treat my comics very well, especially as a kid. You know, I was reading them and I wasn't, you know, I would keep them in bags and boards, but they'd be out, you know what I mean? And on my desk or whatever. And as a result, over the years, if I pull out some of those older books, a lot of them are bent and, you know, they're a little damaged. But this, you know, I can tell that I kind of revered this book. You know what I mean? I treated it really like an object of importance.
It's a holy grail. I have some of those too, that there's got to take care of all of these. Can't treat them like I do the rest of the average stuff. I think it's, so how you said, so you mentioned the word, it's like a little unsettling. It maybe feels a little bit raw. And in rereading it, actually, before talking to you, I could totally see that, and to try and think of the comics that were out at the time, and then how this just does stand out amongst the others, where the others, even some mature stories, nothing looked like this at the time period.
Yeah. It's interesting looking at McKean's work now, because it's gotten so impressionistic, you know, and the figures have gotten cartoonier over the years, you know, and this book being very realistic. I mean, there's some stuff in there that is photoreal, and you know, like the shard of glass going through his hand and the blood dripping out underneath that. It's just, I remember thinking at the time, someone actually drew this, you know, someone actually was able to produce this. It was a mystery to me, you know, like, and I think there's power in that when you do comics. It's awesome to be able to look at pen and ink and work that you can see the artist's hand and it's cool to see that stuff. But there's also part of me that loves when I pick up a book and I'm like, how did this person do this? What is the magic trick here? You know? And that's something that Arkham Asylum does. But even in the writing, I think it really pulls that off. I wouldn't consider myself a huge Grant Morrison fan. I enjoy his work, and specifically the work he was doing at the time, I really am a big fan of. You know, that some of that earlier Doom Patrol stuff and Animal Man and Arkham Asylum, this kind of stuff I thought was incredible. And you can really see Grant Morrison, like a hungry, young Grant Morrison with this book, you know? And there's some turns in the story that, like specifically, one of the things I always talk about is when Arkham comes home and finds his family murdered, you know, and there's that scene where he's like, I can't find my daughter. And he's like, and then I look at the dollhouse and the dollhouse looks at me. And there's that, the way they handled the violence of that scene was, number one, so kind of tasteful, you know, like they don't show you anything that is disgusting or turns you off. It's just unsettling. And just the way he was able to, the words and pictures, the way they were able to achieve that really, that moment in the story is crushing, you know, because you've gotten to kind of like this character and you realize at that point that there's no turning back, you know what I mean? And it mirrors also Batman's kind of sanity slipping away as well. And I remember when Brian and Azrael and I were talking about Damned, and we were talking about this kind of weird effect we wanted to achieve with the book that you don't often see in comics, but almost never in Batman books, which is this David Lynchian kind of moments where you almost feel like you're inside of a nightmare or something like that. You know, you feel like, it says my internet connection is unstable. I hope we don't lose this. But yeah, it's hard to pull off in comic books because comic books are so, they don't have sound and they don't have inflections and things to enable you to really fall into those moments, some of those weirder moments, you know? And so you have to find visual cues that are very powerful that kind of take people there. And so that's where a lot of that imagery in Damned came from, of the beating heart, you know, the bat wings and the beating heart and the bat staple to the chest, all that kind of stuff, were these moments where I was really thinking of Arkham Asylum in those moments, and some of the imagery that McKean was able to create in that book that, you know, it's just, it hits you on various levels. On the story level, it hits you. On an emotional level, it hits you. But then it almost can just be taken out of that book and put on the wall and enjoyed as almost like as a single image without anything else. And that's very hard to do, I think. So the fact that McKean was able to pull that off so young, I don't know how old he was when he did that book, but it was, you know, one of his first books, and it's staggering how good it is.
So I've got a lot to interject here. So it's funny because when I wasn't going to say in the email I'm talking to you, but I had a feeling that you were going to choose Arkham Asylum, because in the DC's Art of Lee Bermejo book, I think one of the questions was the Batman stories that influenced you the most, and you'd mentioned Year One and Dark Knight Returns, but then you brought up the scene that you just talked about in Arkham Asylum of the dollhouse scene.
Yeah.
And I remember in reading the book about your art, and that question sticking out, because that image is such a standout image. And I think for the reasons that you just listed, of a lot of times it's scarier what we don't see. It's more impactful what we don't see, because all of our minds just go down its own rabbit hole. No pun intended, I guess, considering the book we're talking about. But we can make it so much worse. And yeah, and as you said, it was, I mean, weird considering the scene and what's happening, but it was done tastefully. It wasn't I can't think of the term. Uh but I mean, you get what's happening, and it's not taking through every single aspect of what's happening. Um and then your comment, I had never considered that was damned. So McKean's art, it just seems has in it's been very impressionable on you, I guess probably your whole your career.
Yeah, I, I mean, the artistic goulash that kind of came together to you know, whatever the various influences that have really steered me over the years. I mean, I wouldn't say he's a powerful force in all of that. I think that what he was able to do was more of a feeling that I
Sure.
like. I would hope one day to be able to achieve. You know, I know that I can't do what he does, and I'm a different artist than him. I'm a more literal artist. I like to see pores and skin, and I like to see texture, and I like for things to have a really complete feel to them. I think McKean and Sienkiewicz and some of that school of guys, Barron's Story, they're all very good at giving you little pieces of information, but not giving you everything. You know, they just give you enough to kind of give you a sense of what's going on, as was the case here with Batman. I mean, I remember reading this book as a kid and thinking it was super cool, but being slightly annoyed moving through the book just because you never got a good look at Batman, you know? And then finishing the book, realizing how much I'd never seen anything done like that before. So it immediately stood out in a way that nothing really had to that point. But me personally, as an artist, I'm obsessive about that costume stuff and the look of characters, and it's part of what I do that is really radically different than what a guy like Dave McKean does.
Yeah.
You know.
So it's funny how you mentioned that about Grant Morrison earlier, because I sometimes can get a little frustrated, I think, with his writing. I always respect what he's trying to do, because it is trying to be ambitious and do something different. It's respectful to the character, but I know, like Batman RIP, that was a frustrating experience. I still don't know if I like it or not yet.
Right.
With Arkham Asylum, these latest editions that they've released, they include Morrison's script in the back. And so I wanted to be ambitious and read the script. And I remember reading the script before, and I thought that maybe I got a little frustrated in McKean's art, because I thought, oh, that's what Morrison was trying to point here. And I didn't get that. And I thought maybe I would go in and out of some of Dane McKean's art, but still confused on how I felt about that, though, whether it was, oh, that's cool, and I'm kind of lost, or I'm frustrated because I'm not able to put together the meaning of what's trying to go, what the point is right here.
Right. It's kind of the double-edged sword of allowing people behind the curtain to see the script, you know, or to see. I've always had kind of a very conflicted relationship with stuff like that. Even doing the art book, they always want to see kind of pencils or rough sketches and stuff like that, and my attitude is yeah, very conflicted about how much you want to open up the hood of the car and show people that engine, you know. Not in an effort to hide anything, but just because some of the magic can also get lost, you know. And when you do read scripts, you know, and then you see what the artist actually did, and the marriage of the two visions. Sometimes stuff changes. Sometimes you lose elements that maybe the writer wanted. Sometimes you gain elements the writer never thought of, because the artist is adding another layer that it changes things, you know? And I think that's why sometimes it's cooler for me in the same way that some directors just say, hey, look, this is just the cut of the movie, you know, like there's not going to be any director's cut or behind the scenes, you know, whatever. It's just, this is what the movie is. And I think it's the same thing with comics, because, you know, I remember reading one of Alan Moore's scripts early on, because a colleague of mine at Wildstorm, his first gig, his first job ever was drawing an Alan Moore story.
Wow.
And yeah, it's pretty crazy. But he had this script, this Alan Moore script, and I read it, and the script is so dense. I mean, it's like 3 pages written for every page of comic book art, you know? And he gives paragraphs on paragraphs of information and description, and he describes scenes in a way that, you know, could totally fit a prose project as opposed to comics. And then you see the comic book, and I mean, some of it is amazing, but then you really realize that it's kind of impossible for somebody to really get all that information and show you everything in the way that Moore was able to describe, just being such a gifted writer, you know? And that's not to knock any artists who've worked with Alan Moore. I mean, obviously you got Brian Bolland, who did The Killing Joke, and Dave Gibbons, and people who did these books that are, you know, industry changing, you know, in terms of how good they are. But reading that script was that peek behind the curtain that maybe I didn't need to see, you know. Yeah. It was like, no, the comic book that exists and that should exist is the one that was printed, and the one that was, you know, the one that is there for you to consume. And what the what could have beens or what should have beens, it's just part of that creative process. You win some, you lose some, you know.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I find myself, definitely, the more I enjoy a project, the more I want to know behind the scenes, because I do. Sure. It's like, knowing how they did this is not going to bug me and take away now how much I like it, because I do like it that much, and it seems stuff I don't like, and I don't really care, because it just didn't work for me, you know. I agree with you. I can't.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to change it, or not change the subject, but you mentioned Brian Bolland, which is funny, because I don't remember where I came across, but I think I came across that Grant Morrison actually wanted Bolland for this story. And though I think I like Bolland's art more than McKean's, I don't know how. I just don't know that works. Obviously, now looking at it 30 years later, of course, but in trying to think of Bolland's art, just seems very like clean and detailed, and that's not the story that I think Morrison was trying to write.
You know, that would have just been 2 totally different things, and probably Bolland would have done an amazing job. He's an amazing artist, but you know, the book wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have clearly wouldn't have had the same effect. But I get what you're saying in terms of also having that curiosity when you like something, because you obviously want to see, it's the human nature. You want to know how they do the magic, you know what I mean? And I fight, like I said, I'm conflicted, because I often fight that urge in myself, where if, you know, like I said, I see McKean's work and I'm like, how did he do this? How is a person able to produce this work? You know, human hands made this. How is that possible? And so that's a cool friction to me. You know what I mean? That desire to know more, and at the same time, the product that you actually have in your hand, which is just this, you know, source of magic. I guess there's no better word for it than that. There should be. But yeah.
I think that encapsulates perfectly of this source of magic. So this story as a whole, well, let's backtrack. You brought up the Joker, and in this the script, I think what's really cool is in these versions of the script, Morrison writes annotations at the bottom of each page, which is a great
Yeah.
little commentary for his work. And one of the things he mentions was, I think it was the pencil scene at the beginning, hearing about the pencil through the eye of the nurse, and we see a first glimpse of Joker. And there was I guess a BBC talk show that they had Grant at the time of its release, Grant Morrison and Dave McKean on that show, and they also had Adam West via phone. And then showed, and somebody in the audience said that the Joker looks scary, and Morrison's comment to that was just like, "No shit, sister." I think all of that little, and I love the annotations because him just adding little, stories like that, but it makes me laugh of why would a talk show has this on, and they're bringing in Adam West, the exact opposite take as what they're talking about now to give insight. And for the life of me, I can't track down that video. It's nowhere to be found. So I'm taking Morrison's word that it happened, but of course he's not making that up. But I just find that a funny little anecdote of that version. And yeah.
It's part of what is both frustrating and amazing about these characters is a sense of history, is a sense of all these artists that have contributed to making these characters what they are and help this franchise, this creation to evolve over the years, But at the same time, it spawns this specifically now, but I think probably, almost since the inception, it spawns this sense of people have ideas about who these characters are in their head, and sometimes they become crystal clear for people, for readers, for artists. It's all the same. And so it's what spawns this, well, that's not my Joker, or well, that's not my Batman. You know what I mean? It spawns this idea that there is one version of these characters, or a couple versions of these characters, that are somehow more valid than other versions of the character, And I love Cesar Romero as the Joker, and I love Grant Morrison's, Dave McKean's Joker. It's okay to, I think, enjoy the difference between some people's interpretations, but I recognize the fact that that not everybody can really do that, So you have stuff like, people, specifically non-comic book readers, who have, this idea in their head of who these characters are, and I remember my uncle saw the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and he seemed to really like it. And we were talking about it, and he mentioned the fact that it was so interesting to him that he finally figured out why the Joker is the Joker, And I remember telling him, well, not really. There's a million different theories about who the Joker is, and he doesn't really have one specific origin. But then at the same time, they released this footage of Barry Keoghan, this scene of Barry Keoghan, which I thought was incredible. And you have all these people online going, well, did he fall into a vat of acid? Isn't that? And I was like, for some people, that's how the Joker is. That's the Joker. He's a guy who fell into a vat of acid, and magically he came out of a vat of acid, and he went insane. But that's part of it, where you have all these ideas about who these characters are, competing with readers sometimes, you know what I mean? And competing for readers' affection and attention. And so it makes doing any Batman project even more fun to me, but also sometimes equally frustrating because you're fighting 80 years of history and multiple iterations, and there's that guy who's always going to say that Joker's it's just disgusting. Joker should be, Joker should be, smooth and pretty, or, there's all these different feelings about how that character should be. And so that's why when you see something like more like the Arkham Asylum Joker just punches you in the face, because you're just like, oh, this is such a unique interpretation, of that character.
So when you said that about what your uncle had said, instantly makes me think the Killing Joke and how he says, if I'm going to have a history, I want it to be multiple choice.
Right. Yeah.
Perfect.
It's genius.
Yeah. Perfect summary of that character. I think that can apply to many, but the Joker, like, definitely that's his origin. There you go. It's multiple choice. So.
It's brilliant, but you won't find people who will have read that. They've just seen the movies maybe, or they've just seen the cartoon, and so for them it's Jack Nicholson falling into a vat of acid, and the Joker is Jack Napier to them, right? Mm-hmm. And you're just like, oh, not really. You try to explain the history of the character, and people get confused very, very quickly if they're not,
So take that. Comics. I loved the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix. The fact of that movie is, I think you don't know, and it's purposely done. You don't know whether he's telling the truth or he's making this up in his head. And that's a case where I don't want to know. If I ever sit and talk with Todd Phillips, I do not want him to tell me what he thinks, because I'm like, it's better left whichever route you want to take. That's a magic trick I don't want revealed. And I think that applies with the Joker for sure. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's tough. It's a tough thing, because you have some people who really want that origin story, and everybody's different, I guess. Everybody's got their own milkshake they want.
So since we're talking about some villains, as we go through the Arkham Asylum, what was we can either say your first impression, or if you want to say now, these years later, of revisiting that story, what was your take on the villains that we see through the story?
I remember as a kid, something that it was a small moment, but it had this big impression on me, because it created a sound and a scene in my head that was so eerie. Was that scene of the Scarecrow just dragging the rake along the concrete of the asylum? Doesn't say anything. He just looks at Batman, and he's just dragging this. I thought that was so creepy and so cool. And the take on Two-Face, I thought was genius as well, just in the fact they were trying to broaden his horizons by giving him more choices than just two, and it really just confused him, and it really just made his psychosis even worse, which I thought was fantastic. It was Killer Croc, the way they handled Killer Croc, and as kind of the dragon in the castle that had to be slay, all that stuff was really cool. But the villain that got me more than any of the others, though, was Mad Dog, right? The serial killer, he was the villain that just made me. He just made my skin crawl, I guess, the most. So they're all, amazing. Amazing interpretation of the Mad Hatter scene, very trippy, and What about you? What were your?
I'm with you. The Scarecrow, because I'm a sucker for Scarecrow. I love the Scarecrow. I think visually he is great, and the character with fear is great, and that image. Or that page, because it's a couple different panels, but just the scraping, that always stands out to me as the scariest. But there's, I think what you just hit on too, though, is so we can see Scarecrow and his imagery. He looks cool. And Killer Croc is cool and Two-Face, that's an interesting idea. Whereas Mad Dog, it's like, no, he's not cool. He's uncomfortable. He's scary. He's disgusting. And the effect of that character overall in the whole story is maybe like the most messed up of the Arkham Asylum story that Morrison wrote. That's it. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, he's the more, and the sad thing is he's the most real, right? He's the most realistic of all that, because you have all these kind of comic book Batman characters, albeit done through this very twisted, dark lens. But the worst of these characters is the more real kind of serial killer character of the story, you know. And I do think, though, that's something that I really like about the book is the characters are still recognizable as who they are. You know, he didn't try to make them real. You know what I mean? He Joker looks like a monster. I mean, essentially, you know, he's that elongated face that, you know, he really pushed Two-Face's hair that was, you know, standing, you know, straight up, and all these visual details that took you out of this kind of otherwise very real, you know, very real style. And that's something that's always stood out to me, which is like, if you do these characters, it's cool to go super cartoony and exaggerated or super real, but the characters should retain, I think, that sense of who they are. You know what I mean? The moment you start distorting that too much, it to me, I lose my connection with them as these kind of ciphers. You know what I mean? Like you want to know that you're looking at Scarecrow, for example. You know what I mean? And that's another one of the reasons why when I see Batman Begins and I just see Jonathan Crane for most of the movie walking around like a normal dude, and then he puts on the mask, there's that part of me that goes, oh, just take that one step further. That you know, it was always like the comic book iconography it was almost like they were embarrassed of it in those moments. You know what I mean? Like it took kind of a back seat to the world that they were trying to create. And I always wanted to see the hat and you know, like I wanted to see the whole get up and you know, it's part of the characters I think is really important to try to hold on to that. You know what I mean? When you're doing them.
I thought that Goyer had said that he had to talk Nolan into even Crane putting on a mask. I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm not making that up. I'm pretty sure I came across that at some point, and because no one was even thinking, do we need to do a mask? And David Goyer was like, yes, we need him to put on a mask. We need him to put on the Scarecrow mask. Wow. And I'm really glad he talked him into it.
Yeah, the mask was cool. I mean, it was an amazing looking mask, and it was just too bad that idea wasn't carried through a little bit further. You know what I mean? They didn't go a little bit further, but I know a lot of people really like that about those movies, you know, and it's something that people dig, the whole, you know, Gotham looking a little bit more like a real city. And I know that some people really, really enjoy that. I'm a person, I like to see a bit more style, you know, added to something, which is, you know, people complained about the Riddler in this new Batman movie, but to me, I was like, he's a guy in a mask, you know, like they gave him a mask, they gave him the green costume. It was different, but you know, they still gave him the green costume with the question mark. I thought that they actually pushed it farther than in some ways than they do in the comics, because in the comics, he's generally just a guy in a purple suit, right? With question marks and a hat. Or, you know, like if you go back to the 60s, he's wearing spandex, which I also think is super cool. I always loved the Frank Gorshin portrayal of that character, but I enjoyed the fact that Reeves actually gave him a mask, made him his own vigilante kind of character. I thought that was a very cool twist, you know,
Mhm.
and kept the comic book stylistic element. You know what I mean? That to me it's important to kind of walk that line. But anyway, yeah, I digress.
No, I'm with you on that. And the Riddler to me, I mean, I took my fiance to see the Batman too, and she is my barometer for, she's not as in like reading the comics or anything. She goes and sees movies, and that's the extent of knowledge. And she goes, well, the Riddler to me, he wears green and has a question mark and he asks riddles. And I said, yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. And whatever they do aesthetically, I'm cool with. And I've been in on that look since the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's always good to have somebody who isn't as deep into this world as maybe we are. You know what I mean? Because I know that I tend to see a lot of the stuff through my own lens, obviously, which is I have my own years of constructing my own visual world, you know, with these characters. So I already have these preconceived notions that can sometimes get in my way when I go to see these movies. And so, yeah, my girlfriend is the same. She doesn't really know comic books. She doesn't know the world as intensely, you know, and she just goes and sees it as a movie, you know, all these she goes to see as a movie. So that's a good barometer for me as to whether or not I'm making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah, I meant to say when we were talking about villains, I didn't bring up Mad Hatter. I'm surprised that he wasn't included more in this story, considering it's bookended by Lewis Carroll quotes.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it works to the limited part that he's in. I'm one that, man, I yearn for some more Mad Hatter stories, and done in a very, I mean, you could even say a Lee Bermejo universe, you know, with that kind of approach of I just envisioned, and maybe Matt Reeves, like I could envision his style now with a movie of like, that's an opening to a movie, is an old Alice in Wonderland kind of setup, and you have a Mad Hatter there or something. And like, the Mad Hatter, I don't think is a very jokey and character. I think that he's somebody that can be done really effectively and creepy, and I think he's creepy in Arkham Asylum. So yeah, I meant to mention that too. Are you a fan of Mad Hatter? There we go.
I've never been like super into him as a villain, but I think that all these characters kind of fulfill a different type of criminality, you know? So you have the Joker, which is, he's kind of just like chaotic crime, random crime, you know? You have Two-Face, institutionalized crime, you know what I mean? You have Scarecrow, which is narcotics. You have, you know, I like to break these kind of things down into more, I guess, more digestible bites to understand the character in a more simple way, you know?
Yeah.
And so Mad Hatter for me was always a weird middle ground character where I thought, well, he could kind of be a drug, you know, you could lump him in like you could with the Scarecrow in a way. But the mind control thing that he does, I always have had kind of a hard time figuring out how to do that without some kind of like narcotic, or you know what I mean. And so those characters, I just drew him for the first time on a DC villains cover with a bunch of other characters I'd never drawn. Ra's al Ghul, Talia. I did. I've done very little Poison Ivy. I just recently done her more, and those villains are harder for me to wrap my brain around. You know, like that's where I start to. That's where my brain shuts off the realism aspect a little bit more. So like Poison Ivy, I take her in a more kind of monstrous kind of territories, and the Mad Hatter too. I mean, I just. You know, I tried to just make him look, you know, very, very creepy. But yeah, I don't really feel like I have a take on some of those characters. You know, but that's the great thing about the world of Batman, is that you can easily take almost any of those villains and really do something interesting with them. You know, there's really not a bad villain in the bunch. You know, Clayface is an awesome character. You know, just a lot of possibilities. I like pretty much them all. I just don't like Bane. He's the only Batman villain that I just don't want to have anything to do with. I had to draw him once, and I was like,
I was gonna say that I think in your story with Brian in the world, was that the first time you've ever had to draw him?
Yeah, hopefully the last. Yeah, that was enough for me. Yeah, it was just drawing that scene. I was just thinking, what are these? I mean, I know the history of the character, and I know what he's about. You know, this Venom steroid kind of thing that he has going on. But isn't he supposed to be like super smart too? And he's like Batman's superior physically and mentally. I'm just like, aren't there a bunch of other characters that would be better suited to do the, you know, like, isn't Ra's al Ghul essentially, isn't he Batman's superior physically and mentally? I don't know, maybe not, but you know, Bane always kind of felt like it's just very much a product of the 90s.
Gotcha.
I think.
Well, I think the image looks great. Was Man-Bat, was this also the first time you had to draw Man-Bat? I can't think of
First time. That one.
Did you like that too? Or do you like Man-Bat?
That was cool. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Kevin Nolan, and Kevin Nolan did the Secret Origins Man-Bat story that has always been one of my favorites. I just think he's Man-Bat's like a kickback to like the Universal monster movies to me. Yeah. You know, which is what I think is cool about that character. I love that horror stuff in Batman's world. But to me, that stuff goes really, really well together. You know, it's the Universal monster aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's what I was going to say, is the aesthetics and almost the atmosphere of it. Like I can I keep going back to the Batman, but it makes sense. The world, the atmosphere of the Batman, the movie was almost 3 hours, but I mean it, give me 3 more, because just sitting in that world, and I mean, that resonates with comics as well. Is that kind of world, and just like, just give me some more. I guess as we need to march to, I want to respect your time. For the Arkham Asylum story, what do you think? I guess, what did you get out of the story as a whole?
I mean, it's cliche, I think, but I really do think the point of the book is just to really show the fact, number one, that Batman is equally as insane as his villains are. But I think the other thing the book does really that it's overlooked, I think, is at the end of the book, Batman's like, you're free. Do what do what you want, essentially. There's an element of mental health discussion that is, especially now, what's going on in the United States, and essentially, you know, we're in the middle of a mental health crisis, unlike we've seen in 100 years, you know. And I think this book is really an interesting kind of glimpse at that as well, albeit done 30 years ago, which is this idea of like, is it, where does this kind of mental health problem come from, and what's the solution? Is the solution institutionalization, or is it, you know, it's a complex kind of question, and coming from a character like Batman, whose whole job is to stop these characters and lock them up. The fact that at the end of the book, he was just like, you're free to go, you know, you're free to essentially do, you know, the doors are open, you know. Joker just saying, we know, like, you know, you know. I thought that was so, I just thought that was so interesting, you know. It's again, there's this Batman narrative that I've talked about it a million times. It annoys me. it's the last 20 years of Batman, which is, if not more, which has been this regurgitation of a Miller version of the Batman character, who is this RoboCop like, you know, it's all about justice. I eat, sleep, and you know, it's just about the war on crime, you know. And the other more humanitarian aspect of Batman has kind of been left behind, you know what I mean? Which is that Batman also has a heart, you know what I mean? Like in earlier stories, like you see this a lot in the 80s stuff. Batman has a lot more heart in him, you know what I mean? He's not just this kind of cold, I'm gonna make you eat rats and you know what I mean? That's not, there's more to Batman than that. And I think that you know, that's something that's interesting about Arkham Asylum, is it really, it kind of teeters on the line of that, where, you know, he's, you know, he walks in and Joker grabs his ass and is like, you know, loosen up, tight ass. And Batman's like, he almost recoils at that act, you know what I mean? And you see these kind of two aspects of Batman that then at the end of the book, he is almost flipped over to the other side, you know what I mean? Which I think is interesting, that Batman's not just this one-dimensional, you know, more machine than man kind of, you know, harbinger of justice. You know, I think that there should be a little bit more a humanitarian nature to the character. Anyway.
Nice. Yeah. I think as I continue to, because good Lord, clearly I have not read every single Batman comic that's ever been made, but to go back and look at the time, the end, like the, what are you going to say, the watermark maybe that this story puts on Batman's history. Nothing like it came before, but I think in the message too that you just talked about, and I'm trying to find it now exactly what, I mean, the Joker has as he usually always does, he puts the exclamation point at the end of the story. And that, as you just mentioned, of, we know we can go out there. And then he even says, I can't remember the exact quote and I can't find it, but you know, it's almost like, you've always got a spot here, Batman, because you belong with us. And it's almost as if the real world out there, it's like, no, that's the madhouse. This is the safe place. And I think that is such a good, it's a good point on their relationship. Of Batman and Joker, it's a good point of what Morrison, I think, was trying to say with this book. A good point of how Batman can be viewed from people. I think that, like, that is such a big exclamation point to me on the meaning of this book. So though sometimes I got lost in the art of not knowing what to say, I think in the end, clearly I got enough of it that I wanted to investigate more and read Morrison's script and stuff, to where I missed some, but I didn't miss all, because I did get that, which is what I almost think the whole point of the story was. So
I think the Arkham element of it too is great. Is this man who's kind of dedicated life to mental health, and then at the end of the story, he's like, I'm where I belong. I'm here with the, you know, I'm another inmate in the asylum, essentially. I thought that was very cool. You know, the how you know, there's the famous, what is it, the Alan Moore line, all it takes is one bad day. You know what I mean? Which I think is also another great way to talk about Batman. You know, it's just that very fine line between what he does and what these other crazies do.
Pertaining to this story, I ask 3 questions of everyone about this story. Do you, off top of your head, your favorite part of Arkham Asylum?
Favorite part. I'm cycling through so many scenes in my head right now.
There can be multiple. It's not a harsh rules on this.
How can you not love the way it ends with Two-Face basically lying and letting him walk the door, and then the shot of him seeing the scarred coin. What does he say? Who loves you? You know, or something of that nature. He makes some line like, I forget what he says exactly.
Who cares for you?
Who cares for you?
Yep.
Yeah. It's just a great ending. You know, I just really like the way the book ends, and yeah, that stands out to me.
I think for me, it's always been, I can instantly picture the Scarecrow scene, which is really funny because it's just him dragging the rig, but then also that opening scene with the Joker and the telephone call, because you're seeing the speaker on the phone and you're hearing Joker, but you're imagining it yourself, and then ends up being a joke. So I think that's just because it was so effective on me. I think the first time I read it, which I think I was like maybe 11 or 12 the first time I read it. So perfect age to read this story, I guess.
Yeah, really.
How about
our parents?
I know. Funny about it, it was my uncle's and we were staying with him, so my parents didn't know. How about a favorite panel?
Favorite panel. The big close-up of the Joker. One of the initial panels of the Joker's, you know, as Batman walks into the asylum, there's that big shot of his face, which is just amazing. Yeah, it's just incredibly stunning.
I already said the Scarecrow scene. I want to have it a little different. So yeah, I think that painted look of the Joker was pretty terrifying, because that was this is different.
Eyes.
Yeah. It's like this is like nightmare stuff right here. Would you ever like to see them adapt this into an animated movie? I don't know if you're into animated movies or animation or anything, but
I love animation, but I am not a fan of the DC animation.
Okay.
I'm not a fan.
Okay.
I really want them to step up their game. There's no other way to say it.
Sure.
It's just if you watch what's being done with Love, Death, and Robots, or the Blade Runner. I don't know if you've seen the Blade Runner, a Black Lotus stuff,
No, not yet.
Animated show. The level of animation has gotten so high out there. To see Batman, which is one of the biggest IPs, Superman, any of these huge corporate IPs that they have, how can you have such poor quality animation on these amazing properties? I just don't get it. I mean, I look at that stuff and I think they must have horribly low budgets. Nobody is wanting to invest in these animated movies. And so when I watch them, they just kind of, and I really haven't seen that many. I watched a bit of The Killing Joke, because I know Brian wrote that. But even that, it's not even the stories. It's just the animation that gets me. I can't look at it. And I hate to say that, because it's like there's a lot of people work hard on these things, you know, but it's just, I think that there's a level of quality that in the world of animation has gotten so high that they have to step that up in DC as well. It's high time they do that. So no, I would rather them not do that, especially because they could never capture McKean's vision. You know, they would need to do a CG animated movie that would cost a lot of money, and they would never do that. So I like the fact that it's its own thing. It's a beautiful graphic novel. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too far from you. I do like a lot of some of the DC animated stuff. Actually, I like a lot of it to a degree, but I think it's too bright and it would be way too crisp and clean for this story. I think they'd take the wrong message of quote unquote nightmaring it up or dirtying it up or anything. It'd be the wrong way. I just don't see how that they would capture the nightmarish world that I think that this is kind of created. So don't even try if you can't, to me.
It's just strange. I think that if they're going to do animated stuff, they should stick to the Bruce Timm, Batman animated. They should just do multiple movies of that, like Mask of the Phantasm or something, as opposed to taking kind of a poorer version of that mixed with something else and making, doing something that was adapted from somebody like Brian Bolland, which is like, that movie did not reflect Brian Bolland at all. And I thought, man, if I was Brian Bolland, I would be offended, because I would say, like, did you guys not look at what I did here? Like, it doesn't even resemble his stuff. So that's a tricky subject for me. I would love to see a DC do some animated stuff that I like, but it has yet to happen.
So do you have anything you haven't said about this book that you would like to add to it?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. I think we said it all. Oh, the lettering. I'll talk about the lettering a little bit. The lettering is outstanding. The lettering too is something that I talked about when we started Batman Damned, because I wanted the floating letters without the balloons like they did for the Joker. I just thought it was genius. All the characters had their own font. It changed the voices of these characters. It just added something to the reading experience to me, and I think the lettering is maybe underlooked on this book, but it's spectacular.
So I don't know if you've seen the 30th version reprint and then beyond, the 30th anniversary reprint and beyond. They've outlined.
I only have the original. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it was originally outlined in white, and now they've redone it and outlined in black. That helped me read the Joker's dialogue. And I know that's really getting into something, but I think sometimes a frustrating experience in reading it was because with a book, you can only hold it so close to your eyes. I'm like, man, I can't, I don't know what's being said here. And I think the black outlining actually did help me some. The approach of doing it that way, I think is a standout. It's a very uncomfortable, unusual, and different way that comics had ever been done in saying dialogue. So I think that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I meant to bring that up as well. And again, it's great hearing from you and talking about with Damned. So how you said with McKean's like realistic blending, and that's you bring into Damned. I never pieced that together, and I think that's a really cool.
The lettering definitely. I definitely pointed to Arkham for that, because I just don't like comic book lettering that feels kind of cookie cutter. I like it when people adapt it to the artwork, So if you're doing something that has a look that's not quite traditional comics, which Damned definitely wasn't, and Arkham certainly is not, it's cool to play around with that, because the lettering is part of the art. It should be part of the reading experience. And for me, a comic isn't a comic until it's lettered. I guess as soon as it's lettered, it becomes a comic to me. But even when I'm working on something, I'll have the PDF or whatever and all these pages I've done. But it's when I see that thing lettered, all of a sudden it becomes real. It just takes on life. So it's spectacular. I should get that 30th. What is it? The 30th anniversary you said, or was it?
Yeah. That's the most recent is the 30th anniversary. They did an absolute, which now is really hard to find. And so it's very expensive. Good luck. Good luck if you can find someplace that has. It's been,
especially over here. I won't find.
Nah. It's been a treat talking to you about this. As I've told you before, I'm a massive Bermejo fan. Anybody who listens to the show knows I really like your work. It was great a couple years ago, before the pandemic, which seems like so long ago, but wasn't. It's not even 3 years ago. I got to meet you in person, in which you signed, my Damned and Batman Noel, which is one of my favorite stories. Period. And I want to point out that like this image over here is one of my favorite images I think you've ever done, which is great, because I like how you said you bring like a realism factor into it, but it's such a nod to the old stories of Catwoman's got a tiger and Robin tied up. But I think
Yeah.
the realistic approach of how you bring the close up on Catwoman's face is just
Oh,
incredible to me.
thank you.
So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that I love this image, in which no clue if you've ever said this is your favorite, least favorite, or even brought any attention to it, but that one in a book that is full of, you could say, screenshotted images, that one really stands out to me. So wanted to note that out, because why not?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to talk this time without feeling like my head is gonna explode, like in Chicago. You know, it
Yeah,
was definitely you know, yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. In case people, do you want to use now to plug anything, how people can follow your work, what's coming up, anything at all?
I don't think I can say
Okay.
anything right now. I think that it's probably better not to, just because I definitely have two projects coming out this year. I just can't say when or what. So yeah, I should wait. I should wait. But
Got it.
I can just say that there'll be a couple things coming this year. So
Cool.
yeah. As soon
Excellent.
as I say more, I will.
On and you're on Instagram, is that usually your voice of uh saying stuff,
Yeah,
announcing?
that's the only social network I have, and I've been told many times that I don't post enough, but it's I just I post when I have something new that's good enough to show, I guess. But yeah, it's just, I think it's Lee Bermejo art at
Got it.
that's the Instagram.
Yep. Got it. And I know you've been posting your variants on the Detective Comics covers that you've been
Yeah,
doing, and that's coming to an end soon, sadly. So
I'm finished with them. So
oh,
I
you're done.
think that there's one more that's gonna come out. I think I wound up doing 43 or 44 of them. So it's been fun. It was a great run. They actually tell a story. I don't
Mhm.
kind of. I mean, it's not really like a sequential story. But when I started the run, it's Detective Comics, and so I thought, what can I do on these covers that's a little bit different? And I thought, well, I just kind of like to do. I had no idea it would go on for so long at the time, but I thought, I thought, let's try to tell a loose story with these covers where you could kind of put them together even in different ways. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to be. There's not one right way to kind of put them in order, but there's
Mhm.
certainly groups of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was a fun experiment, and yeah, it's kind of sad to be done, but at the same time, 44 or 43 or 44 is a lot
Yeah.
of covers. I think it's time to let somebody else come in and do some good stuff there. But
They look great. I hope DC comes up with an idea to collect them, because I was too late in the game and I missed the first few of my OCD. If I miss some, I'm a mess. So I hope that they can collect them all in some regard. So
yeah, that would be nice. That would be really cool. But it's if I can pull something like that off, I most definitely will. It'd be great to get like a collected edition of them eventually. That'd be
excellent.
cool.
All right. Well,
Cool, man.
I will let you go, and I appreciate you once again for sitting down and talk to me
My pleasure. My
about
pleasure.
comics and your work. Appreciate it, Lee.
Thanks for letting me ramble.
Of course.